The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for signing in on today's webinar. We will get started in just 2 minutes. We're going to give folks a couple minutes to get logged on. Thank you. All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started. Welcome to today's webinar, our Early Childhood Advocacy webinar about where to share your message. I'm Lauren Robertson, and I'm the Digital Advocacy Manager at Child Care Aware of America, and I'll be guiding you through today's webinar. So to get started today, we are going to go over the agenda, and then we're going to review last week's webinar and then dive into the content. Like I said, I'm Lauren Robertson, and we have two other Child Care Aware staff on the line. We have Chrissy West, our Director of Advocacy, and Liz Twilley, our Social Media Manager. If you have any, and we also have Cameron Joy-Kurtz on from Child Care Aware of Washington, so if you have any specific Washington questions, feel free to ask those as well, because Cameron has all the answers. Today, we're going to be talking about planning visits with elected officials, preparing for site visits, sustaining advocate networks, and using social media to amplify your message. Our objectives today, as you can see on the screen, are really focused on those topics, and we want to be able to leave you all with skills today that you can go out and be advocates in the world. Again, if you have any questions, please enter them via the chat box. We're going to record this webinar and send it out on Monday. So if you have to leave early or if you miss something, it will be recorded. Attendees are on mute, but again, enter your questions in the box. And we do have poll questions, so we're ready to participate throughout. If you're not familiar, and I know this is from last week's slides as well, Chrissy, Liz, and I make up the Child Care Work Team at Child Care Aware of America. We are the advocacy part of Child Care Aware of America. We consider ourselves a movement, not a campaign, and we are working for affordable, quality, accessible childcare for all. So before we get started, we are going to do this poll question, the first one today, of what describes your role. So I'm going to launch this poll question. according to Cameron, I think a lot of you will have similar roles right now, but we still like to see who's on. All right, it looks like most of you, if not all of you, are CCR&R staff, which is great. Welcome. We love talking with fellow CCR&R staff members and hearing your perspective as well. So we're really excited that you're on today. So just to review from last week, we talked about effective storytelling on last week's webinar. Chrissy wanted to detail and gave some great examples of how to effectively tell your story. These skills will be really important for meeting with elected officials, setting up site visits, using them on social media. I just put this slide in here to emphasize the importance of your story, provider stories, family stories in the fight for accessible, quality, affordable childcare for all. So our first topic today is going to be about engaging elected officials. Before we dive in, I have 2 poll questions for you all. This is just to gauge your comfort level with setting up meetings with elected officials, if you've ever done it before. So if you've ever met with an elected official, let us know. If you haven't, that's cool too. It can seem kind of daunting if you've never done it before, but I think after today's webinar, you'll feel much more comfortable. So it looks like some of you are saying yes and some of you are saying no. If you have set up a meeting before, hopefully this webinar will be a good review for you and show you new ways to engage with your elected officials. And if not, you're going to leave this webinar knowing exactly how to do it. And our next webinar question, how comfortable are you in setting up a meeting with an elected official? I know when I set up my first meeting with an elected official, I would have put myself at very uncomfortable. Just the idea of having to call on the phone was uncomfortable for me. And I know Chrissy can attest that too, that it's pretty daunting, but we know that once you get the skills, it's not as daunting. So it looks like, ooh, we're split. We have some folks who are very comfortable, but we have other folks who are very uncomfortable. So for all you folks who are very uncomfortable, you are going to be comfortable by the end of today. Don't worry. All right, so the great thing about getting time with elected officials is you don't necessarily have to set up a meeting with them at their office. So you don't have to worry about parking and finding their office because elected officials can and should be out in your community. So one thing we encourage is if you can't find a time to meet with them, or if you want to be in a place where your message is heard, not just with the elected official or staff, we encourage you to find times in your lawmakers in your community, such as at a town hall or at community events or coffees with your elected officials. At places like town halls, you may need to sign up on a list. And it can be daunting because you have to speak in front of a larger group, but that means your message does get out to more people. You'll have less time to speak about your message, but you can focus on your ask and other people will hear that message. In a meeting with elected officials, you probably are going to be meeting with staff, which is okay because the staff of elected officials are the messengers and are the people who are leading that work and often own certain bodies of work such as childcare and early childhood or education or human services. So they often don't need as much ground level work. They just need to know the ask and your data. There's lots of other places you can find your elected officials. Later on, I have a picture where one of our family advocates found their elected officials at a community fair that they had, and she knew they were going to be there, so she came ready with handouts. She tracked them down and she talked with them. That can seem a little scary, but it also is very short and quick in getting your message without having to call. There are many ways you can get time with your elected official online. You can check Town Hall Project, which lists elected officials, mostly in Congress, who are having town halls across the country. If you want to do it, set it up with an elected official, a specific meeting online is usually your best bet in filling out the form. It's totally okay to meet with the legislator staff. Again, I think when you've never done it before, you kind of feel intimidated that you're going to go into this room with this elected official and you have to be super ready to go and their time is so important, which is great and a great opportunity, but meeting with their staff, again, is a great opportunity as well. I put this example in here because one, I'm from Wisconsin originally, so my parents' senator is Tammy Baldwin, or one of their senators, and just to show you that a lot of elected officials make it super, super easy for you to reach out to them and find time with them. On Senator Baldwin's website, she has a button on her screen saying, how can I help you? And you just fill out those forms and send the request in. And I think this is also a really good format to follow because it's asking the topics you want to address, the requests you're asking, how many people are going to be there, and any additional information. They prioritize constituents, so if you are bringing providers to a meeting or bringing family advocates, making sure that constituents are in the crowd is really important. So if you are calling or sending an email, it's really important to be concise and to the point. So for that legislative assistant or that aide that is sitting at the computer going through all these requests or answering the phone knows exactly what you're asking for. Make sure if you're a constituent, you identify as a constituent. I know when I've worked for elected officials before, we had a big notebook of all of our voicemails that we would get. And anytime a constituent called, we would put highlighter around it. So we knew later on that those are the people we're going to prioritize to meet with our elected official. You also want to make sure you're including how many people are attending. This might seem like, okay, it will be 4 to 6 people there, but elected officials and their staff need to know this because they need to make sure that they can fit you in their office or find a room that fits you. I know Jake, who is our policy manager here at Child Care Wherever America, was telling me a story that he went to go for a Hill visit the other day to visit Representative Ilhan Omar from Minnesota, and it was supposed to be 3 or 4 people, and it ended up being like 8 or 10 people. And the staff was kind of overwhelmed, and it kind of took away from the meeting time because she had to find chairs for everyone and make sure that everyone was like in the room and could hear everyone. So you want to make sure that you are being very explicit of who's going to be attending so that they know what to expect. When I scheduled for elected officials, I always put all this information in the calendar invite so that whoever was taking the meeting, whether that was the elected official or not, had background information and knew what to expect so they didn't go in blindly as well. So like you don't want to go in blindly to a meeting with an elected official. They don't want to go in blindly either. So this is just a slide of lots of things to expect at a meeting with an elected official. It seems overwhelming, but basically the gist is you want to keep it short and sweet because you have to be flexible with your time and it probably won't start on time. And you want to make sure that you leave time for a conversation with the elected official or staff that you're meeting with. I find that the most effective meetings with elected officials and their staff are times when you're asking them questions as well. You want to make sure connect the ask to them personally or through their interests. I know we have a family advocate who always says, she always asks the elected official, tell me about your kids, or do you have grandchildren, to talk about their experiences with childcare. Almost everyone has an experience with childcare, and if they can talk about it and relate, they're more likely to remember your meeting and understand why you're asking what you're asking. It's great to have materials ready and leave behind materials that aren't too wordy, materials that have the ask right there on them, so that later on, if they're like, that person came in and they were asking about childcare and they had a provider with them, what were they asking? That handout can come out and they can say, here's the ask, this is the contact information, this is what I need to know. And we always encourage you to take pictures, because when you take pictures and you post it on social media, which we talk about later, that is holding your elected official accountable. You're tagging them, you're saying, hey, I met with you, thank you for meeting with me, and remember, this is what I asked for. In the previous webinar, we talked a lot about crafting your story, and this is also helping others craft their stories, their asks, and meetings. This is just a really concise overview that you want to practice it. You want it to be devoted to one story, one issue. So when it comes to childcare, for example, there are many things that go into childcare. We know it is costly. We know that it's inaccessible for many families, and we know that we need to improve quality. It's great to focus on one thing with one ask so that they understand exactly what you're asking and they can take action from there. You want to make sure you center on the personal. I think a lot of times we focus on providers and families, but as CCR&R staff, you also have a story because you work with both every day, and you work with the community. You work with people in the business community and educating them and all that stuff. So you play such an important role in childcare and childcare policy. So CCR&R stories are just as important in my view as family and provider stories. So again, just emphasizing to bring stuff with you, bring data with you to show why you're asking what you're asking. You probably know that Childcare Aware of America has lots of different resources for you from our research team. Childcare Aware of Washington has tons of resources as well. We have fact sheets, we have things talking about cost of care. Whatever you can do to match your ask with data is important to show at your meeting. This is a really good example of what a really concise one-pager will look like. It has an advocate's story, that's Julia's story, who lives in California. She has stats about childcare specifically in California because she was visiting her senator in California. And then she also has the specific congressional request. So she brought this on the Hill, and she told her story. She included statistics in her story as she told it, and then she ended it with a specific ask. She also included her contact information, so then if that staff is like, I remember that I had this parent in here, she was telling me her story, or this provider in here, I can't remember who it was. This has her picture on it. She remembers, can email her easily. It's all there for the elected official and their staff. Liz will go more deeply into using social media, but it's really important to share on social media to show that you are keeping them accountable. I really like both of these pictures because this is Julia again. The picture to the left, the lower picture, is with a legislative staff. So this was a scheduled meeting where she called, she set up the meeting, she showed up, she brought materials. And then the one where it's outside, these are two of her elected officials that she found at a community fair. You can see it's informal. She went up to them, started talking to them, and she made sure to get a picture to remind them that they had this meeting. So another way to engage with your elected officials is to bring them to childcare and show them what it actually looks like in your community. Before we jump into this topic, I have 2 poll questions to see how you all feel about site visits. Have you ever had a site visit with an elected official, whether you've led one or set one up with the provider? Maybe you were a provider at one point and you set one up, or you had one come to you. So some folks are saying yes and some are saying no. There's lots of different site visit types, great benefits from them, and we're just going to dive into them a little deeper. So right now we're saying about 3/4 of you all are saying no and 1/4 are saying yes. So for the quarter that are saying yes, I hope you can learn some new things, but also be able to share your lessons with your other colleagues as well. And then just to follow up with that, how comfortable would you be in setting up a site visit with an elected official? I know it can seem very daunting to do all the logistics and bring someone into a center, into a family childcare home, and expose them to everything and make sure all your ducks are in a row, but it can be really impactful. And I think today we'll overview it, and we're also here to support if you're interested in setting up those site visits. All right, so some folks are very comfortable, and some folks are somewhat comfortable, and some folks are somewhat uncomfortable. So we'll quickly go through this to just talk about the benefits and then move on. So site visits can be used for a variety of reasons. I like both these pictures because they are from site visits that are 2 different reasons. The one on the left with the big group of people is a site visit at a childcare center where they introduced a piece of legislation. So the elected official got to see the childcare center, got to hear from providers and families, and then also use that opportunity to introduce legislation that was impacting childcare. On the right, this is an example of taking some legislative staff around to a local childcare space and showing them and being in a mission. It's less overwhelming because there's less people there, but they're really getting to see childcare in action. It can be kind of overwhelming because you have to do all the logistics for site visits, but the main thing is making sure you have a provider who is willing and ready to do it, and you are ready to take care of all logistics, so the provider just has to focus on having their center family childcare home ready to show to the elected official. We have handouts that I have attached to this webinar, and we'll also send out in a follow-up email that really outline even more deeply how to set up an elected official, and then on the other side, as a childcare provider, how to set up your time and space to lead a site visit with an elected official. I always say you don't want to change anything, right? You want to show them what it really looks like and feels like in a childcare center, and you want to be able to share your story and show off your space. and communicate with families that this is happening. And also remind the elected officials that not only do you have many families in your child care center, you have families that are voters and that are involved in your community and are employees and employers throughout your community. And you want to make sure that you say thank you. These elected officials are coming out to you. You are not going to them. They are finding a parking spot. They are coming to you into your space, taking their time. And so this is a really great opportunity to show them what it's really like in a childcare space, but also you need to be very grateful to them. I always say my idea for saying thank you always is to have the children in the childcare provide thank you cards, because I think that is something that they can easily hang up in their office as a reminder, and including the ask on those thank yous is really important. Like, thank you so much for visiting our child care center. Don't forget of our ask for a funding increase for reimbursement rates or something like that. So I included this picture here because this is actually me with a former elected official I worked for. She did a program where she brought books into barbershop spaces to encourage folks to read. It's about reading wherever you are in the city. And so I wanted to use that picture as an example of it's good press to have elected officials out in the community seeing the real life experiences of their constituents, especially with children involved. They're having real life experiences and they're educating themselves, and they aren't just making policy blindly. They're really be able to put a face to the policies they're making. I've seen multiple times in testimony from elected officials when they're writing bills, they might be hearing from a lot of constituents, but they often note one experience they had that changed the way they thought of something or really changed their experiences. So they're like, I visited a family child care center and I saw all the paperwork they had to do to get the child care and adult family food or adult food program. And I just, I want to make sure that program's fully funded and that they have access to it no matter blah, blah, blah. And I've seen elected officials do that, and that's really impactful because they are able to connect it to their own experiences. So again, these are the handouts that we have, and we'll send them out that outline them even more deeply. And if you are reaching out to a provider and want to set up a site visit, this is a good handout as kind of a teaser, being like, this is all you have to do. It's not too much, and I'll support you. So I'm going to pass it over to Chrissy, but before I do, we're just going to run through these quick poll questions. She's going to talk about how to set up an advocate network and how to sustain an advocate network. So are you part of an advocate network? Do you help run an advocate network? Do you know of advocate networks in your community? I know in Child Care Aware of Washington, Cameron and Ryan have been really active about getting those advocacy leads ready to go across the state, and that is a great opportunity. So it looks like most folks are saying yes to formal networks, and some folks are saying no. If you're not part of a network yet, will give you the tools to start one or to how to engage with one. So if you are part of a network, what are the challenges to sustaining a network? Is it time, lack of structure, communication, keeping advocates, getting advocates in the door as it is? You can vote for whatever you feel. Because we know that there are lots of different types of advocate networks, and we also know there is lots of challenges, but also strengths as well. So it looks like a lot of folks are saying time. That is a big one. I think what Chrissy will go over today will address how to do this in the most timely fashion. And then some folks are also saying recruiting and retaining advocates, and Chrissy will definitely go deep into that today. Last poll question before I pass it over to Chrissy. Oops, that's not the right one. I used the wrong one. What is a strength into sustaining your advocate networks? What are strengths that you have in your community, in your workplace that helps you sustain your advocate network? So some folks are saying strong buy-in, and that's so important because if you don't have buy-in, how can you sustain your network? Strong communication, that's awesome. I think communication is the key, and different opportunities to engage, that's awesome. All right, I'm going to close that poll. And now I'm going to pass it over to Chrissy, who's going to talk about advocate networks. Chrissy?
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we're first going to talk about how you engage advocates. This is not complicated, but I think it's something that we often forget about, especially at like a systems level when we're doing kind of work on like a larger scale. It's hard to remember that there are individual voices that are in here that could really help us. So one of the things that we remember is that we want to elevate voices of our advocates. So naturally, as a state or a regional organization or a CCR&R, we have a bigger platform than they do, generally speaking. You know, we have a website and we have email newsletters and we have staff and social media. We want to make sure that we're sharing these things with them, whether it's giving them research and data and reports or taking their story and elevating it on a bigger level. And so we want to make sure that we're being responsive, answering their questions. If that's on social media, if it's in person, if it's via email, whatever platform they're reaching out to you, you want to make sure that you are being responsive. And we want to elevate these voices with our much bigger microphone. And I want to call out especially voices of people of color, women, trans persons, immigrants, homeless families, the working poor, workers with non-traditional hours or jobs involving manual labor, things that we typically don't call out in our stories. So a lot of times we have sort of a general narrative. It's a 1 or 2 parent household and they're working and they're just having trouble kind of financing their childcare and paying their other bills and taking care of their family. And that's great. Those stories are really important. But when you get someone that's willing to share their story and they're maybe a woman of color or an immigrant family, you want to make sure that you're highlighting those too. And those people especially are often left out of the narrative in ways that we don't realize. And so it is sort of our job to make sure that we're raising those voices up. It does also help gain trust in those communities and with those individuals that we're supporting them in telling their story. We want to make sure that we let them know that we respect their story and that we're raising their voice, not just taking their story for our own purposes. You always want to make the advocate feel like the relationship is reciprocal and authentic and that you do value them, because we do, honestly. We can't do anything without their parents' stories, and we tell our advocates this all the time. Once you find your advocates, you want to make sure that you're retweeting them, reblogging them, sharing their posts on Facebook, sharing their posts on Instagram, reaching out to them personally to help them tell their story, giving them trainings if they're not comfortable talking to media, just making sure that you're supporting them and helping them get their message out. You know, one of the things we actually like to do is we have a Parent Voices blog on the CCAOA website, and so we often have our parent advocates do a video blog or just a regular blog post and share their story and an ask or their perspective on something on our personal blog, which we then share in our newsletters and on social media. You might be thinking, how do I find these advocates? That's a little more complicated, but hopefully in the work that you do every day, you're recognizing that every single family you interact with has a story. They may share the entire story in a phone call because, you know, they're just frustrated and they need help and they're reaching out, or they could be someone that you come across on social media on the page, just venting their frustrations or their concerns. It also could be a family that you're working with that really has a lot of questions and wants to make sure that they have the full story, they get all the information. These are people that you want to tentatively, and without crossing any boundaries, obviously, reach out to and see if they're interested in sharing their story on another level, or maybe sharing their story to members of the state legislature or to members of Congress. It's pretty easy to identify them. It's harder to kind of cultivate that relationship. And so you want to make sure that it's authentic, you're answering their questions, and maybe just bringing it up as an option. You don't want to pressure them, but you know, you have a really great story. We do a lot of work on supporting families that don't have access to quality care. Would you be interested in sharing your story with our members or on social media, or could we feature you in a blog post? You just need to put it out there. If you ask once and they say no, that's fine. As they continue to engage with you or your organization, you can gauge their comfort level on what they're willing to do and share, and maybe ask them again. One of the things we heard from our parent advocates on a panel last year that we hosted was that if you keep giving them opportunities to get involved and to be invested in the issue, they're more likely to eventually take you up on that offer. If you just put it out there once, maybe they're not ready at that time or they have a lot going on. I mean, obviously, like probably most of you on the call, you're a family and you have a job and maybe you have hobbies and friends and people you want to hang out with. We're all juggling multiple things and these families are no different. So we just need to respect that time. Next slide. How do I retain advocates? It's recognize, appreciate, elevate. Those are the three things that we try to do. We publicly recognize them for the work that they do and that the mission that they fight for is advancing our cause, and that they're basically non-paid staff. They're doing the work of other staff people that are sharing stories with lawmakers, going to talk about our specific legislative ask, but they're not paid to do this work. And the lawmakers need to hear their stories. So we want to make sure that we're recognizing that. We can't get anywhere without their personal story. We're appreciating them, letting them know that they're important to us, and giving them the credit that they deserve. As many days a week as Jay and Jake, our policy team folks, go up to the Hill and talk to legislators, we are constantly hearing from people in DC that the most impactful stories that they hear are the ones from the parents that kind of drive that point home. We want to make sure that our advocates know that they're really important. And we want to elevate them, so help them tell their story. So like I mentioned before, if you have a big microphone, you want to make sure that you're helping them get their story out there with your bigger microphone. Include them in your organizing structure if you can. Make them a leader so that they can help train other volunteers. There are ways to get them involved that make them feel like they're appreciated and valued and they're really contributing to this issue. Next slide. So we have some different ways that advocates can get involved, and it really varies on the comfort level of the advocate. We will ask them to share their personal story, and that could be in a blog post or on social media or with press. They could talk to their direct elected officials, and making sure that they're a constituent is really important. They could post to social media to help drive the narrative. So just even sharing with their friends and family on their personal networks, our own legislative asks is a huge help. Rapid response to legislative issues or stories. Testifying to the state legislature is often something that we do a lot in Virginia. So Child Care Aware Virginia has family advocates who we also work with that are constantly going down to Richmond and sharing their personal stories and trying to improve health and safety standards in the state. And without them and their stories to drive this point home, a lot of the laws that we've gotten passed probably wouldn't have gone anywhere. And then recruiting other parent advocates. So if an advocate maybe has a really traumatic story or a really personal story that they're not comfortable sharing publicly, they might be okay talking to their friends and their family who also have children and likely struggle with the cost of childcare, and asking them to get involved or to share a message on their social media or to take action and contact their legislator via email. It's these little things that all come together to really make a well-rounded advocacy plan and an advocate network. Next slide. So identifying advocate voices. Why do we talk about advocate, parent or family advocacy so much? It really helps us paint the picture of why laws need to be changed or strengthened. So these stories influence the changes that we've seen so far in childcare. So we want to make sure that we're identifying them, and then they're really making the connection. So they're shaping the vision, they're changing the policy, and they're growing another network of parents who will hopefully join them and step up to the plate. These parents are worth more than we could ever afford to pay them. And we always say that volunteers aren't paid because they're worthless. They're not paid because they're priceless. We couldn't afford to pay our family advocates if we had to, because they're worth more than gold. They're making a difference by becoming leaders, getting trained, and then hopefully replicating that effort with other family advocates. So when we talk to them about reaching out to friends and family, it really is about identifying other people who might want to join this network and do the same thing. Okay, so we think about just these three quick questions. Who has a childcare story to tell? What are those stories about? And who should hear those stories? So we want to talk about who is sharing their story or who really needs to. It may be that you have an advocate, you know their story, but they're not ready to tell it. Working with them so that they're comfortable. It might be hearing a story on the news and thinking, we really need to get a hold of that parent. And then you find ways to find them on social media or reach out to the reporter who interviewed them, and making sure that their stories are getting elevated as much as possible. who needs to hear these stories? It's not just lawmakers. It is, business leaders. It is community members. It is other parents who suddenly realize that they do have a value and a story to tell. So answering these questions as you're identifying an advocate can actually kind of give you a good background on where they would be a good fit or how you could use their story when asking for a specific piece of legislation or more funding on something. Next slide. So we're going to talk about
Chrissy.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a question, and I think this is a good part to do it. What strategies do you have for managing advocates who negatively engage with your advocacy, therefore those who regularly and publicly respond with opposition to social media posts or action alerts?
That's really interesting. So we haven't had a lot of opposition directly to our action alerts as far as responding to the legislators, but we do often, when we send them out, responses go back to our Child Care Works inbox. And we do have people that will just respond and say things like, don't have kids if you can't afford to take care of them, or maybe the mother should stay home instead of going to work. These are all things to consider. We respectfully usually either just tell them, that's not our priority here. We're child care aware of America, not, stay-at-home families for America. Or we often get a lot, the problem is regulation. We need to get rid of all regulations in order to have more child care. I understand their point. I can see where they're coming from, but politely just explaining that those are not our priorities. And, if you wish to be unsubscribed, we can certainly take you off our list is always an option. On social media, we find that when people are engaging negatively or they want to start a discussion, that actually allowing some dissent is really helpful for fostering that discussion. So it could be that they're commenting about the regulations piece and saying that we should have no regulations, and that's what keeps people from opening child care centers. I see your point, but if we have one of our advocates respond and say, getting rid of all regulations actually puts children at risk, like my child who died due to unsafe practices in childcare, I mean, it's really hard to argue with someone that has that kind of story. So if you're able to allow that dissent and, not let it eat at your soul when you're doing this, it really does help foster discussion. We usually have probably 5 more parents that will respond to that and disagree with them. If things start to get out of hand, you can just hide the comment on social media. That doesn't notify them that it's deleted. In fact, they still see it there, but nobody else sees it besides the admins on your page. That's a huge help because at some point, we all have jobs to do, right? We can't just monitor social media all day and get involved in these arguments. So if it really starts going off the rails, you can just hide the comment. I prefer to not block people unless they're using foul language or attacking people and violating the community standards posted on your page. But if you're able to allow some of that dissent initially, it usually sparks a really good discussion. I don't know that we've ever changed any minds, but at least they'll stop, commenting and saying, we need to get rid of all regulations, because it's really hard to argue with a mother who says, my child died in an unsafe childcare setting because they didn't follow regulations. That's a really hard case to make. So those are just some kind of quick tips. I don't know if Liz wants to jump in on the social media piece at all.
I could just give a little bit about social interacting with people on social media. We typically don't get that much negative feedback, but we do get a lot of people bringing up an additional point that can be viewed as in opposition to us. And basically, I like to, if they're truly negative and they truly want to have a discussion, I would always recommend that you talk to them kind of offline, address them publicly, and then take them offline into a more private forum. But the most common thing that we get on social media is us making a statement saying this is what we want to work towards, and people saying, well, are you thinking about it from this point of view or this point of view? And the best way to say that is to always thank them for their valid points, say that that's like a huge help. Thank you for thinking of that. This is why, maybe back up your point. This is why we're fighting for this cause in this way, but always thank them for their point of view and say that you're going to take that into consideration and make them feel like they have aided in your message in some way. And now back to you, Chrissy.
Thanks. Okay. So I hope that answered your question. question asker. I actually didn't see the question myself, but I think if we're ready to go to the next slide, we could talk about building a sustainable advocate network. And so there's some different types, models of leadership. The first one on the left is a really ineffective way of bringing a community together. Just has one leader doing all of the work with a bunch of followers. I'm sure at some point everyone on this call has felt like that one dot in the middle where everyone and their mother is coming to you with questions. How do I do this? What are you going to do about this? Where's this at? And they're all coming to one source. That's not effective. You can't get anything done when everyone's coming to you. It just becomes a bottleneck. The second model on the right represents when several people are doing a task, but they don't coordinate with each other. And this model also does not work. I will just say we might run into this a lot in our own organizations where we're sort of siloed. So I'm working on this one advocacy thing, and then Liz is working on a social media thing, and we don't realize that we're working on the same issue. And so we're not aligned with messages, we're not aligned with branding, we could be supporting each other. So neither of these models work, but we're going to show you one that does work. And it's going to look crazy, so don't freak out. Okay, this is called the Snowflake Model, and this is actually a sustainable advocate network model. Since advocate networks tend to be mostly volunteer, we want to make sure that no one person is really getting tasked with everything or the one doing all of the work or answering all of the questions, because like we saw before, we've all been that dot that everyone's coming to, and it really isn't sustainable. So this focuses on cultivating parent leaders that are committed to strengthening the quality of childcare in our example. It was actually started by Marshall Gans, who is a professor at Harvard, and he helped organize with Cesar Chavez the United Farm Workers movement in the 70s, and he also worked with Martin Luther King Jr. So in this work, it's been done in community organizing, and it's been replicated recently too. So like the Obama campaign used it for Organizing for America, Moms Demand Action uses it in their state volunteer network. So these are worn, tested, proved models, and you can actually vary it by the different roles you have, or if you want to do it at a local level or at a state level. It's really a flexible model. Basically, you have the person in the middle who maybe is the project organizer or the state organizer, and off of them you have maybe 4 leaders. Maybe someone is a phone bank captain, maybe someone is writing letters to the editor captain, one is a canvassing captain going door to door, and maybe one is visiting legislators captain. Each of those volunteer captains then maybe has a team of people that are all doing this, working on that one thing. So no one person is doing all of the work, and they're all communicating at their own levels so that they're aligned and they have the same messages. And now I'll show you an example of that. So building an advocate network, just using kind of a generic parent leadership model. So in the center, we have just a CCR&R or a parent leader. This could be maybe Ryan or Cameron at the CCR&R. And off of that, they might have 4 teams. So you have a volunteer in your advocate network that's the parent recruiting team lead. And then you have one that's the events planning lead, and one that's the social media team lead, and one that's the policymaker outreach. And then off of each of those teams, they have 4, 5, 15, however many volunteers that they work with. So you've trained these 4 leaders, and those 4 leaders in turn have trained their teammates. We call them SPLs on here, but they're state parent leaders, so they're parent leaders in your state, to work on whatever their tasks are, so that if we need to do an event at the last minute, the events planning team can go into action and say, okay, we need to get this event up. Who has the capacity to do this? Maybe 3 advocates step forward and say, I can find a venue. Someone says, I can find food. The other one says, I can start recruiting. That's great. No one person has to do anything. They're all talking to each other, and that event or task actually gets done. The reporting structure is actually pretty similar too, because they're all talking at the same time, so everyone's on the same page. So that's just sort of what it could be like in a state. We did this exercise in Alaska, and they actually came up with different ideas and different roles. And it's so malleable that you could make this even just a local, like maybe you just have a Seattle team that you want to use for Snowflake. You could do a Seattle team and then have a bigger state team and have a regional team in Northwest Washington and have one in Central Washington. This is so flexible that you could use this model in any way you want. So this is just sort of a random example. I know that it looks crazy, but did we have any questions or anything on this? Because it is kind of a lot to take in. And it does depend on recruiting volunteers. So you may have some teams that are more robust in the beginning than others, but that's Okay, that's why we learn and we grow. Okay, so I don't think we see any questions. So we'll move on to the, oh, I think I see one, except I can't read it. How does our advocacy lead team fit with this? Your advocacy lead team. I'm not sure what
Hey, Cameron. That's so, Chrissy, the folks that are on from the CCR&Rs at the state level in Washington, they've identified different leads for each. So Cameron, I'm going to unmute you. Oh, you looks like you're muted. If you want to answer that question, feel free.
Sure. So would you mind, please, Chrissy, moving back to that slide that has the visual there?
Yep.
Yeah, this guy.
So I would say that we probably right now look something like a combination of the policymaker outreach and the social media team. And we've kind of, that all exists in our ACE team here in the network. And I would say that those parent leaders, the SPLs, are kind of our regional advocacy leads who have their own networks that they've been building within their region. So it does look a lot like this. And I would say that probably as we move forward, we'd continue to grow and maybe have more of a parent engagement team, something like that. But it all kind of, it exists kind of within our department here in the network office. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
That's awesome.
Thanks, Cameron. I think Chrissy, Cameron makes a good point that these things kind of happen or occur naturally even without you realizing them, even if you're not modeling it this way. So yeah.
Absolutely. And it's my Snowflake is perfectly symmetrical because I'm a little OCD, but you know, your Snowflake might not be totally symmetrical. Maybe you have a really strong parent recruiting team and a really strong social media team, but you're still working on policymaker outreach. I mean, and these things can vary, the roles can vary. Moms Demand Action uses this, and it varies by state, and then each state has, you know, a bunch of smaller snowflakes within the state, and they all report to a larger snowflake. It's really flexible into how you want to work it in. So now I'm going to hand it back to Lauren, and she's going to talk about ways to incorporate parent and family advocates and their stories into your advocacy to make it more effective.
Thanks, Chrissy. And I'll just breeze through this quickly so you can pass it on to Liz so you can talk about social media. And I think this is really related to what you all do as advocacy leads and involving other folks as well. But I think anytime you see the word parents, I always like to say that it doesn't necessarily have to be parents. It can be families, providers, CCR&R staff, whatever works. But we, you know, in the previous webinar, we talked very explicitly about how to tell your story. And so you want to make sure that you are recruiting and sharing those resources with folks who join your advocacy network formally or informally to be able to tell their story. Here on the slide, there's 2 stories from families that you can watch after the webinar that are really a good example of how to connect your story to action. And you want to make sure that you have folks who are ready to take action at a moment's notice. I think Child Care of Washington's Action Center does a really good job of this, of sending out real-time action alerts to everyone. So using that as a tool to engage folks is a great opportunity. So with the last 10 minutes, we're going to have Liz discuss social media. I'm going to quickly go over this last poll question of what skills are you looking to build in social media? Whether that's building an audience, creating graphics, writing eye-catching posts, increasing engagement on posts. Liz can really tailor the next 10 minutes to what you specifically need. She has lots of information that can be downloaded and saved and everything. So however you feel about what skills you need for social media. So it looks like some folks are saying building an audience, and Liz is really going to talk about that, about how to engage people, creating graphics. So it looks like all of these are great things. So Liz, I'm going to pass it over to you for you to go over social media. So just tell me next slide whenever you want me to move forward, Liz.
Okay, thank you so much, Lauren. Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Twilley. I am the social media manager with Child Care of America. And so we're just going to spend a few minutes now going over how to engage your audience. And really, I saw that you guys want to see a lot about building your audience on social media. And so these first couple slides are just kind of to level set, you know, if you're not on social media, then maybe you should be, because that's where the people are. People are using it, especially in the childcare field. It's used as sort of a search functionality when parents are searching for care. You know, if one of their friends on social media has reviewed or commented about a specific center, that's going to be an endorsement. It's more of like a personal review system than something like Yelp. And so you can really create relationships with people and other organizations through social media, even though it is a digital platform. Can you go to the next slide? And it's also somewhere that you can engage with your lawmakers. As we've talked about, if you have an in-person meeting with your lawmaker, we want you to take a picture. We want you to tag them. We want you to remind them of what you were meeting about, remind them of your ask. And the fact is, all of them are on social media. So you can find all of your senators, all of your representatives. They're all on Facebook and Twitter. And so that's just, and you can look up all of their handles, and there's some handy resources to help you do that. So I just want to reiterate that that's somewhere that you can find them. Now, if you're really new to social media, it can seem really daunting. I get it. There's a lot of different platforms out there. There's a lot of different information. And so this is kind of a breakdown of the most popular social media channels, and really pick one and start with one. You don't have to create accounts on all of them and try to get really overwhelmed with everything all at once. You can just pick one. Facebook is a great place to start. And you can just kind of build a page and start building an audience that way. And then once you get comfortable with one, you can move on and then start an Instagram or start a Twitter. Next slide. So once you kind of set up your account, now we need to start building your audience, creating a name for yourselves in this sort of digital community. So you need to kind of build an awareness of your presence. Chances are, if you're starting a totally new page, you have 0 followers. Everyone has to start somewhere, and that's totally fine, but you need to find your audience and you need to meet them where they are. If you're starting on Facebook, there's groups of parents, probably parent advocates, that are specifically in your area, and you can start posting in these groups and joining them and inviting them to like your page, and sharing content that you have. You can explore paid promotion. Social media is a great place for that, because you can go as low as $5 and you can spend as much as you want. So it's really customizable to whatever you want. And if you do paid promotion, you can easily target people within your area and within a community that you really want to engage with. And then as you you want to start to move traffic to your website. That's really important. You want to kind of create this experience, and that's going to enhance like your brand and reiterate your authority within this space. So all of your posts should have a link, and we want to, as frequently as possible, have those links be back to your website for further information. And that's really establishing your voice as an authority in this space. And then as your audience grows, you can have your advocates and your partners be a part of your message and have them share your message. And you can interact with them and engage with them. And as you start to build your community, you'll have people kind of helping spread your voice on your behalf. Can you go to the next slide? So this is sort of just an example of a campaign that you might run on your social media channels. So if you have come up with a specific legislative ask for your state officials, that is awesome. And this is how you might disseminate that ask to your audience. You want to figure out your messaging, which you do kind of want to have a little vetting process for your message. Just make sure it's clear, that it's concise, that it's easy to understand, that it gets the proper message across. And then you want to create an action alert on your website where people can easily, with a few clicks and just a little bit of typing, take the action that you want. Send that action alert out via email, share it on your social media channels. And a big part of that is to share a social kit to your partners. You don't want to simply say, hey, we did this, and please please share it on your social channels. You want to say, hi, we've crafted this tweet and this Facebook post, and it can go along with this image. You want to make it as simple as possible for your partners and for your advocates to share your message. You want to basically say, hi, we've done all of the legwork. You just have to do a little copy and pasting and press send. Next slide. So these are a few main points to consider in your advocacy. Basically, just think about your audience, think about who you're trying to communicate with, and really just try to generate a conversation. You understand your audience and you understand the barriers that face your community that might not be persistent across this entire country. So you have the unique ability to really touch base with the community in a very unique way. Next slide. So these next few slides are more on the graphic end on showing you how to create graphics and just some little pointers. We're really going to breeze through them. You can go to the next one is for Instagram. This is just about visuals and pictures, and you can see that there's some tips on the side on as to how you might create an engaging Instagram post. But since we are running low on time, we're going to just kind of flip through this one. The next one is Twitter. And can we go to the slide that's about the data on images? So a lot of work that CCR&Rs do is great, but you end up with like a lot of data about childcare in your state, and that's not necessarily fun to just read. So these are just some examples of how you can display that data in a visual way that's a bit more engaging, that might get people to stop the endless scroll on their phone and actually engage with your post. Next slide. And hashtags. These are a bunch of hashtags that we use on social media. And so if you're looking for influencers, if you're looking for advocates, if you're looking for partners in your social media journey, these hashtags are a great place to start. We use hashtag childcare with about 99% of our posts at Childcare Works. I would like to point out that daycare is on this list, and that is because most people still use the term daycare. We, as much as we can, are trying to switch that to childcare as we feel that it elevates the field. But the fact of the matter is most people still do use daycare. So it is a hashtag that is appropriate to search for when you are trying to find people who also care about these issues facing families. Next slide. And this is, I believe, my last slide. And these are really just some resources to help you. There are free photo sites. There's also free sites online for photo editing if you want to add text to your photos and make them a bit more engaging. If you want to add graphics, I know that that was one of the things in the poll that people said that they wanted to learn how to create some graphics. These are a lot of great resources for you, and of course they'll all be sent out to you after this webinar. And there's also some extensions that can help you with scheduling and basically taking a lot of the daily work off of your back. So these will go out. These are great. And if you need to learn how to use any of them, you can feel free to reach out to me. And if you have any specific questions, absolutely reach out to me. I believe Lauren will give you my email. It'll be in the follow-up email after this webinar. I can help you with anything that you need.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. I know social media can seem overwhelming for folks who are unsure, and the great thing about our team is that we have a person devoted solely to social media. So again, if you have any specific questions or things you want to work on around social media, Liz is here as a resource for you all. So to finish up, we just want to make sure that I'm sure you all are signed up for Childcare Washington's Action Alerts. I just had a really great talk with Cameron and Marcia today about how great they use their Action Center and how they're really on top of things and sending things out. We had a question from someone noting that, or a comment from someone noting that they share the Action Center with providers that they work with, and then providers can share it with their staff and with families. So that's really using that model, that Snowflake model of reaching out to your network. So that's a really good next step. We have a really good link of finding out who represents you. So since the election just happened and you're not sure who represents you at different levels, that's a good resource and a good resource to share with providers and families. Look out for an email from us all on Monday with the recording, as well as other resources, and we will all be in touch with you all and Cameron to support your advocacy and support your next steps as well throughout the legislative session. If you have anything else you're interested in or anything you want to know about, feel free to type it in the chat box or let us know via email after the webinar. And other than that, thank you for attending. We appreciate all you do, and we are all so grateful that you're here advocating in Washington and across your communities for childcare for all. So thank you all and have a great rest of your afternoon.